to stake transfer, mergers and acquisitions, and corporate valuation. He's also working for a lot of startups in validating their business models and valuation. He is an impendal valuer by Gale and Power Finance Corporation and also a part of a startup Chopal as a valuation expert. Our fourth panelist is Dr. Nirakar Pradhan. Dr. Pradhan is Chief Executive Officer of Premium. Sir has 36 plus years of experience in investment, banking, risk management. Sir has been an influential, resilient, and result-driven senior finance professional with a proven track record of delivering global banking, investment, portfolio management, and enterprise risk solutions in multicultural and multi-product matrix organizations. An accomplished multilingual communicator with excellent interpersonal and administrative skills to lead cross-functional teams capable of driving radical changes for delivering effective, efficient, compliant financial policies, process, and control. Our fifth panelist today is Mr. Suraj Malik. Sir is a partner with Tax and Regulatory Services with a focus on transaction tax practice at BDO LPP. Sir is a chartered accountant by profession. He has over 15 years of diverse experience with large accounting firms and family offices. Sir's area of expertise includes deal structuring, fund structuring, inbound investment, mergers and acquisition transactions, corporate restructuring, family offices, and private equity. Sir has led and managed several transactions across multiple sectors such as media, hospitality, real estate, IT, SEZs, and other general manufacturing industries. He has also advertised and implemented one of the largest family settlements in India and structured and executed succession strategy of HNIs and entrepreneurs. I welcome you all, sir, on behalf of Indian Institute of Management, Sirmaur. For our today's discussion, moderator will be Professor Anshu ma'am. Anshu is PhD from IIT Delhi and she teaches finance here at IIM Sirmaur. So now I request Professor Anshu to take over the session. Over to you, Anshu ma'am. Anshu ma'am, unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Pragya. A very good afternoon to all my esteemed panelists, my faculty colleagues, my staff members, and all the participants. So today the topic of our webinar is Future of Business Post-COVID. Presently, the economies across the globe, they are combating the COVID pandemic, and this perhaps is the worst situation or worst economic disruption that the world has seen so far. The people are comparing, or the economists world over, they are comparing the situation with the global financial recession. So my first request will be with the Professor Shiv Kumar to express his opinion regarding that how this COVID pandemic can be compared with the global recession. It is equal to global regression, or it is somewhat different from the global financial recession. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending on your time zone. Let me just place this in a historical context. Each time when we think we have perfected our knowledge in the financial market, something happens and that totally disrupts all of our previous knowledge that we had. All of the late 1980s and early 1990s, we experienced Latin American debt boom and bust era. That is the time during which 2,957 banks failed in the United States. And then we came out of it and we understood, oh, it is important to have some sort of a deposit insurance. It's not free money. It is the premiums paid by the commercial banks that will be used to help unhealthy banks in future. And then comes in 1997, we had the East Asian financial crisis that sent about 7 countries down a currency devaluation or total fall in their value of their currency in the economy. And then we rebuilt. And then everything, Russia, Ecuador, everything else follows suit, the East Asian financial crisis. And then comes in 2004 up to say 2008 or so, we had the global financial crisis. And predominantly, that was the time that is when the market was soaring again, one more time. So we had to halt, and that global financial crisis led us into a recession and 560 bank failures in the United States during that particular time. And then we came out of it, and March 2020 was the time that is when almost all markets had gained about 50% or even more during that time in about 3-4 year period. And then we are now just facing this pandemic that immediately sent the markets downward spiral. And that is where we are currently as we start making this assessment right now. And in order to immediately address that, we always expect our governments and respective central banks to take evasive action for this. And even during the global financial crisis, many of the central banks that came forward, but predominantly those from the industrialized economies. There were totally 43 moves by the 4 central banks. When I say the 4 central banks, I mean the US Federal Reserve to start with, and the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. And each one started pumping quite a lot of money into the market. Their goal at that time was to maintain liquidity or increase liquidity, and to also keep inflation at a targeted ratio in about a 2 to 3% range, and to stop all perils of unemployment that may follow suit because of this. And fortunately, not many banks failed, but still there was a liquidity crisis, and particularly coming from the mortgage foreclosures. But we had substantial sums of money that was pumped into the market by these 4 central banks. The US Federal Reserve brought in 3.1 trillion, that is 3,150 billions of dollars. The Bank of England got $600 billion at that time. The European Central Bank had in excess of about $450 billion. The Bank of Japan brought again a gigantic sum of 2.1 trillion, so 2,200 billions of dollars. And at that time, it was very interesting. One of the biggest international economic research agencies, that is called Nakame from Japan, and they said this is kind of monetary stimulus is an illusion, just basically. Whether it was illusion or not, some writers felt it was disappointing. It was not enough, according to them. And for some people, at least it stopped further failures in this case. Maybe that was true. But one good thing that we learned from the global financial crisis was, again, I give the credit to Nakame Research Agency in International Economics from Japan. This particular agency predicted sooner or later China will be in deep trouble. And during that time, that came out by the end of 2014. That research probably was a very good forecast in this. So now, having addressed the global financial crisis, now how the central banks and the various governments are addressing this is, it is totally unprecedented. More than 160 countries have now done some kind of measures in this. Even the poorest of poor countries, I'm not trying to insult a particular country by naming it, so therefore I'm not naming any single country, but even the weaker countries had to step forward and to provide a lot of substantial support to their respective economies in this case. Many of you in the Indian context, you know much better than I do. I do not want to give you quite a lot of information on that because you are aware of it. But when I read in the newspapers, the finance minister has been vested with the responsibility of pumping in 20 lakhs crores of rupees into the market. And then I had to write down for myself, what does it mean? That is 2 followed by 13 zeros. And she was supposed to create the money that did not exist. And whenever we watch a news clip or a newspaper report, you can see Honorable Finance Minister has aged more than 15, 20 years in this 3 months of time. You can see the rays of anxiety all over her face, trying to address this by way of many, many economic measures in this case. So in order to find that $30 billion, so somewhat that is approximate money that she was supposed to do in this case. So that's where we are in terms of this economic assistance. Having seen this about 150, 160 countries implement varieties of measure, I took about 10 to 15 major global banks or investment banks across the world to find out how do they feel about the measures of a stimulus that's being brought by all these countries at the same time. Some people that is just giving you just one word, keyword description of what they had expressed without naming the individual banks. Inadequate, it was quick, inefficient, it causes confusion, it creates exhaustion for the central banks, and good start, but no fundamental support. It's going to cause a lot of future bubbles for us. Long way to go still, and unavoidable recession is looming large around us, and normalcy could be possibly restored, and it is trying to reverse the path somewhat violently, like a knee-jerk reaction. That's what all these countries are doing. So that's how I can give you a good comparison of where we are right now. So if you have a follow-up question, I will answer that, or I will wait till my fellow panelists have had a chance to share their perspectives. I can always come back and expand on any of these things for you.
Thank you, sir, for your enriching views. Actually, you have answered all my questions in this particular thing, because I was going to ask you that how the COVID has impacted the developed as well as the developing economies, what stimulus are required for both kind of the economies, what stimulus we were expecting for the industrialized economies, as well as the BRICS nations and the developing economies. And you have answered all my queries. So thank you so much, sir, for your opinions.
Okay. Very good.
We have among us Professor Abel from Kenya. So my question from Professor Abel is that I want you to express your opinion that how the COVID has impacted the Kenyan economy, and is there any possibility for the Kenya to convert or to leverage this crisis into the opportunities? Over to you, sir.
Are you hearing me? You're hearing me?
Yes, sir.
You're hearing me. Thank you very much, the hosts and members of the panel. I think Vakuma has given us a very good starting point on really what is happening, and I want to pick it up from there, because Kenya being a developing country, just like India, I think one key consideration is if somebody has not been able to maybe cater for the people who are looking for jobs, taking care of health issues, taking care of some supposed to have, how then do you respond to this global pandemic? Now let's also put it in this purview that this is the first time a large scale pandemic has really come into this particular given purview. So put it like this, we were caught up waiting, like we were not sure. Most people thought this may never come to Africa, but there we were caught, and the government quickly came up with some measures to address the situation. But 2-3 months later, I can tell you definitely the governments have literally given up. They have given up. So what is really happening, and what have I seen are some of the takeaways from this point of view? Some of them can be seen as threats to what has been going on, but the others which are going to come in as opportunities. Now, on the ground, from the day that the pandemic was declared here in early March, Some businesses closed permanently. Permanently, they will never wake up from the slumber. They will never wake up. Now, the other businesses that closed temporarily, and this is where things like tourism, which we are trying to bring again on board, is coming in. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy because the cost of the aircraft running them, maintaining them for that period is going to be very high. Now, not forgetting that the government input into what is coming in is also very small. Continuity plans in most of them, and therefore these businesses are like they are not attainable. So there are things that may not work. They may not work from the ground. Then there are those that remained operational, and this is where we have essential services like hospitals and all of them, including agriculture. But when you look at this is where actually, when you look at the public-private comparison, this is where you find a big gap, because it is an advantage because the government woke up to find nearly about 47 county governments without healthcare facilities. So this is where, and I think it's a plus on our side because now we are able to manufacture PPEs, sanitizers, some masks, some ventilators, bed capacities have been added in various hospitals. But even then, we are not able to do what is called mass testing. It is not possible to be done in this particular given area. Now, one of the area that has also gained from it is on the digital platform, online teaching. What we have been doing and what we are doing. Most of the institutions have been able to adopt to online, like high universities. Universities have been able to adopt that and doing a bit of that. The government has also come in, which is also a very big plus because public sector service deliveries were also very poor, but now we have gone digital. You can have online marriage services. You can have judicial online services. There is a lot of work which can be done on the several platforms, like one we are referring to as e-citizens, that people can do to acquire literary services. Now, in terms of the money bit of it, the cashless transactions have also increased here in Kenya, and I think it is the same as you mentioned in India. Then, in terms of deliveries, also we have home deliveries. Now people are able to get a lot of food, produce, whatever, from different stores and come to the ground. Now, my take from all that is that issue of what models we have been using, whether they are really sustainable or not, that is the question which COVID came in, maybe either to accelerate or which we have to respond to. Most businesses have not been thinking in terms of sustainability. We have not been addressing that. Even when we are talking of going to offices every morning, it was not sustainable in a way. And now it is emerging what we can do from homes, working from homes. It's far much giving us the leverage that we are looking for. So there are a lot of things, I think, which we are going to, as scholars in this discussion, we are going to think around and then look for solutions and answers as a way forward. So it is actually a multi-stakeholders responsibility. Government may not respond to everything, like in developing countries like in Kenya. We need everybody. So we are all involved and we are trying to seek solutions that can give us some lasting impressions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Abel, for your enriching views on the Kenyan economy. We have among us Mr. Manish Srivastava. He is an valuation expert. So now my next questions will be from Mr. Manish Srivastava. Sir, this COVID has actually affected the corporates, basically the liquidity. And when I'm talking about the cash flows, so these are considered as an important measures for the valuation. So in this particular situation, now what will be the challenges for the corporate valuation, and what is your opinion on the impact of the COVID on the cash flows of the corporates? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. With regard to like the scenario that has changed after the COVID-19, the major thing is like most of the business, the cash flows have impacted. And the question is, very difficult question is like how long it will continue? What is the tenure? So as a valuation expert, it's been very difficult for us as well to understand like what is going to be the certainty factor. When we look into any cash flow of any business, the first thing we need to understand like what is the probability factor, like how these cash flows will actually take the reality picture, right? But the question is like, because there's an uncertainty, we don't know, like if we look into the economic, there are various curves we talk about. It may be the U curve, it may be the V curve, it may be the L curve shape. So we don't know like where we are exactly. When it has all started, the market was very good. If you look into the Feb market, it was close to like 40,000 our Sensex was, and after that it has trimmed down to 26,000 level by 23rd of March. And if you presently look at the 36,000 level we are. So the question is like how to address, suppose some company comes to us to get the valuation done, we need to understand like whether the cash flow that the company is projecting, those cash flows will take the reality picture or not. The question is because the uncertainty level is such that we can only opine with regard to certain level of by looking at the market dynamics, like how the market is actually. There are certain sectors which being badly affected. If you look into the airline industry, if you look into the restaurant, they've been badly affected. But there are sectors which have actually gained in this particular scenario. If you look into the companies like Netflix, if you look into like there are certain scenarios like pharmaceutical companies, they are actually gained in this particular scenario. So the impact is not overall on every sector and every segment to the same extent. So we need to understand in which segment you are and how it is actually impacting your business model. So the very important thing is we need to understand the business model of the company. When we look into like, we generally do the sanity check in order to understand like whether the company, what the cash flow the company is projecting, that being right or not. We generally apply the comparable company method. But at this point of time, even if you look into the EBITDA or the P multiple of the listed peer companies, those all are at a very bottom level. Okay, it has come down to a level of 25%, 20%. So whether applying these EBITDA numbers, if we are doing the valuation as on date, whether applying these EBITDA will be the right dynamics or not. The question is whether they are normalized EBITDA we should take, or we should take the EBITDA as on date. This is a question point, and it's been very difficult to address also, because even like looking into the future, we don't know like what is going to the future, whether the thing will settle down by September or it will go till January. So still there is a lot of the uncertainty that is prevalent in the market, and we need to understand those facts, as well as like there are segments in which there's a structural change that has taken place, and which may not be able to recover in the time to come. Okay, so we need to understand these are the things, as well as if you look into like the cash flow, we generally discount it with the KE factor or the WACC factor. If you look into the KE factor, what is happening? This is a component of the two things. One is the risk-free rate as well as the risk premium. So when you look into the risk-free rate, it is coming down. But when you look into the market risk premium, it is actually going up. So these are two antagonistic things that is happening at the same point of time. So how to address the question is like, you can look into various scenario analysis. You can look into various sensitivity-based analysis in order to get the answer to the question. Still, the question is, even after doing so, whether whatever we are doing right now, whether this actual thing will be happening in the future, whatever we have done right now, whether we able to reach the right picture or not, it will be very difficult scenario. The only thing we can do, like bridge the gap between the two by looking at the risk parameters, and we can increase the risk parameter by we can look into the risk parameter by increasing the risk analysis, like increasing the risk premium as well. That is called additional risk premium, or you can say the COVID risk premium. Okay, That may be one part of it, but you can't apply it just on every company in one go, like saying like 5% is the additional risk premium applying. You have to look into like what is the segment it is into, as well as what is the scenario analysis that is building up. Okay, so these are the few things which needed to be taken care of. But still, I believe that I, being a learner in the valuation domain, and every time when you say like I learned this, new things happen, right? So this is the scenario we have never seen earlier, and this is the time we need to again relearn ourselves and understand like how actual the reality will be in the time to come. Okay, this is a bit of the yeah, sure.
Sir, in the present scenarios, there are few sectors only where the cash flow it is running positive.
Correct.
As we were talking about the pharmaceutical sectors or other sectors. But if you look at the another perspective, more than 80% of the industries are like that, where the cash flow has been negatively affected.
Sure.
So
right.
now in this situation, we can, although we can adjust the valuation thing, we can adjust our risk factor or other factors, but what is your opinion to the companies who want to invest in the startup? What is your opinion that how to value these companies? What precaution you will suggest? Because now the COVID is an uncertain thing. We can't predict it with surety that up to what time it will going to remain.
Okay, so very difficult to answer again, like what to suggest or opine on this. But still, I believe like we need to look into the segment where the investor is looking at. Okay, if that is something on the education tech side or something like on artificial intelligence side or something where there is not much of the physical presence or physical movement required, then those things will gain in the time to come. Actually, if you look into like even the education sector, if you look into people used to go to their schools, and now everything is like from running from the home itself. Even the student who being just in the class, first or second, they also being getting all the learning from just sitting in front of the iPad or the laptop. So this is actually the reality we have never thought of, that these things can actually happen, and these are actually happening, and we have no choices as on date, right? So the segment which will actually in this point of time will grow and where the investment can take place will be like which are tech driven, which can be easily managed by sitting at one particular place. And suppose take an example, suppose restaurants are not working these days, right? Nobody's going to the restaurant for having a fine dining. But if you look into the cloud kitchen business, it is actually picking up. Why? Because like you can just make an order and that will come at your home. So the market dynamics has changed, and according to the market dynamics, the scenario has actually changed. So we need to understand the business model need a little bit of the tweaking. Whatsoever business you are doing, you need to tweak your business a little bit in order to sustain with the market dynamics.
Thank you, sir, for your opinion. So my next question again is to you only.
Okay.
Sir, fair value, it is considered or it is actually propagated by our this IFRS as well as the Ind AS. Now, what challenges will be there in valuing the thing at this fair value? Because now the fair to ascertain or to calculate the fair value will again be a difficult task, and it will definitely going to affect the balance sheet of the company. So, what challenges do you expect will be there in the fair value valuation?
Very, very difficult question to answer. And this is the challenge we actually facing at this point of time. And actually, if you talk about to the industry person, if you talk about to the promoter of the company, they themselves not knowing what is going to be the projection of their business and how the future will take place. And they expect the valuer or the appraiser, he should come and say that this is the perfect valuation for your company, right? So the question is like whether the investment suppose that been made that needed to be impaired or not, and whether there's any sort of impairment that is needed. So we need to understand that impairment needed because like impairment need to be done only when the phenomena is a long-term phenomena. If we say that this will continue for a long time, the assets that we have, that we possess, will not have having the recoverable value and the carrying value of the assets more than the recoverable value, then we need to impair the particular assets. Otherwise, if that being a temporary phenomena, we feel like in the time to come, the scenario, and it will take certain amount of time. We are sitting in July. If we travel till December, then we'll be in a better position to give an answer to this question, because how the scenario will take place, how the things will move, because nobody knows like what is going to be the entire perfect tenure in which the things will actually move to the next level.
So in this short term, what measures you suggest, or what regulatory things or the changes in accounting standard you actually suggest for dealing the situation for the short term? That's
what I said, that we need to understand, like if you look into like the balance sheet of the company, if you look into the asset class, if it talks about like whether the assets that we are possessing, whether that have the recoverable value, that able to recover in the time to come, then we will say, of course, we're not going for any sort of impairment and everything is fine. It will time to come. Everything will give of course, will get an answer to itself. But if the scenario is such that if we are seeing that this particular asset class will not able to recover and the recoverability factor is not there, and this even not going to work after even the things get well, then we need to impair those sort of investments. So this is actually we need to look at, but very difficult to answer at this point, because still I believe that we have to travel some further period of time to understand, because if suppose the COVID vaccine comes, then the positive thing will develop in the market and everything will become good. So that is the scenario that is there. But still at this particular phase, because there's nothing like any vaccine is there, so we are in a very uncertain state till which time it will continue. So that is my take from this.
So what strategic changes do you suggest for the business model in the firm, or what changes do we can expect in the business model of the firm to combat with the situation?
With regard to the business model, very important thing is we need to look into the scenario-based analysis. We need to understand that there cannot be one single scenario. There need to be a multiple scenario. Then there need to be a probability factor assigned to it. Then we need to have the calibrated approach, and then sensitivity analysis need to be done of the various parameters which are actually ruling the cash flow of the company. So these are the things that we needed to look at, and because like a single short business model will not be sustainable at this point of time, we need to address the issue with regard to like how the business model in different scenario will work, because nobody has thought of this level of risk that will come into the business, and nobody has made the provisions for this level of the pandemic. But now there is a scenario we need to understand that certain amount of risk that needed to be allocated, and then accordingly we need to structure the things.
Thank you so much, sir, for your opinion.
Thank you.
Now we have among us Dr. Nirakar Pradhan. He is an expert in the risk management. He is the CEO of Prima, the Professional Risk Managers International Association. So now my questions are to you, sir. What will be the new definition of the risk and the risk management in the new normal?
Very good evening. I'm audible?
Yes,
you
sir.
Can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Professor Pragya, Professor Anshu, all the faculties, my co-panelist members, it has been a wonderful, stimulating evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I was very attentively listening to Mr. Shiv Kumar, Professor Kinoti, and also Mr. Manish, and I think I agree with the core message they all have given. The message they have given is challenging and we don't know. And if you ask me to borrow a sentence from somewhere, because it's very difficult to describe what I mean, I remember a small poem somewhere: water, water, everywhere, not a drop to drink. To me, if you look around, just you come out of your room, go anywhere, only one thing you see: as if COVID virus is there, is a risk everywhere. So if you ask me, how do you define the risk? how COVID-19 has, what is new definition of risk, new risk management. I agree with my previous speakers. I don't know. Why I say I don't know? Earlier, we used to go to college. As you said, I'm an expert. I have managed last 20 years the investment and risk. I have managed risk in Germany. I have been very successful in France and in India also last 20 years in Mumbai. And I am really praised my bosses that I am always having top quartile, investment return. Bear market, bull market, whatever market you give me, return is there. But now, if you ask me if I'm honest, I will say that I don't know. So they call it double unknown. First unknown is I really don't know what is the cause of this COVID-19, and also I don't know how to mitigate this risk. But second unknown is, which is more important, is nobody in the world today knows how much we don't know. Only if you know that I don't know what is the risk in this path, I'll avoid that path. I go some other road. But so this is called double unknown. So it is we are still, I will say that inside a tunnel sort of thing. Okay, only we will wait. And having said that, only we can feel, we can experience. That supports you. If you listen to regulator, if you listen to our Prime Minister Modi, you always CNBC 18 or any other TV, you look at anybody, talk to your society leaders anywhere, you know there is a risk. So how can I evaluate a risk? Some sort of evaluation is required so that then only I can measure and manage and control. Okay, if you want a traditional definition of risk is what is risk after all? I understand there are only some students, they are not students of finance. So risk is nothing but in common man language, uncertainty. Somebody who is walking on the road meets with an accident, right? That is a risk for him. That could be loss of life, loss of property, right? So risk is uncertainty, risk is the probability of a loss. And what is the COVID-19, how much loss, we don't know. But why we don't know? Because of enormity of this magnitude, we can only feel. And we can feel this at 3 different levels. One is my own life or my family life. Second, at society level. And third and more important is what our Mr. Manish just said, valuation. He loves numbers, He same way as a risk manager, I have to tell a number. Okay, risk management is nothing but identification of risk, measurement of risk. You have to give a number and how to manage and control that risk. If you fully cannot control that risk, suppose the risk is 100, whether you can bring down from 100 to 10, then you are a successful risk manager. But I cannot give you a precise number, but I can tell you at a life level, I can see this COVID risk. Society level, I can see COVID risk, and also economy level. Economy level, because pre-COVID-19 means till February. If you look at historical last 3 years Indian history, history of Indian economic growth, first 50 years we grew at only 3 to 4%. First 50 years of our independence. But we are lucky last 20 years, if you see, is the average 7%, almost double. But unfortunately, it all happened, started something around 2018. 2018, I think you remember, big corporate called ILFS collapsed. Next year, 2019, another corporate collapse called DHFL. 2020, beginning of this year, Yes Bank collapsed. So risk was there very prominent in the Indian financial sector even before COVID-19. So COVID-19 came at a wrong time. It is still much deeper the risk, but we are trying to really find out how there's some standard to measure the risk, ma'am.
So risk and uncertainty. So now in this particular situation, since the COVID is not in our control and we are not very much sure about the timing of the COVID, that up to what time it will remain there. So what changes in the risk management strategies or the hedging you will suggest now?
Very good question, ma'am. Thank you. First is, for me is important, how do I survive? My family is in Frankfurt. I don't know they survive or they don't survive. We are living far apart. But first and most important for me is survive. So they call it the first priority is risk management is survive. Take care of your life. Second is they said if we can survive, slowly we'll recover or we revive. And third, they're saying only after survive and revive, then you can think of business growth and what they call it thrive. Okay. And to give an example, what has happened last 3 months? Global example, there is Australia, big country, you know. They had second largest airline is called Virgin Airline. In the month of April, they collapsed. Why? Because there is a lockdown. No airline is flying. Okay. So that collapsed. We have 2-3 airlines. We don't know their state of things. We may have so many business. We only hear that they are closing down the shop. Okay. So that is the challenge. As I said, a lot of things unknown. But having said that, this life, society, and economy, 3 levels. But being a student of finance, if you permit me, I'll go, given the framework, a little more into economy and finance rather than much more broader picture. Coming to economy, as I said, first 50 years, we are growing 3 to 4%. Inflation was around 8 to 10%. So first 50 years, all Indian citizens, year after year, they became poorer and poorer. I'll repeat what I said. Growth was 3 to 4% GDP growth. Our inflation was 8 to 10%. So the real, your wealth is nothing but your GDP growth minus inflation. So 4% minus 10%, if you see, is minus 6%. So forget about the number, but first 50 years after our independence, we became poorer and poorer and poorer till 1991, when Dr. Manmohan Singh came and started the reform path. Slowly, it started positive result, and the last 20 years, we are seeing the result. As I said, last 20 years, if you see our GDP growth, average you take around 7%. 2003 to 2008, those 5 years, we say golden years of Indian economy, we grew as high as 9%. But 2018, 19, 20, we have come down from 8% to around 3. Last year, I think it is around 4%. Okay. And this year, the forecast is, that is 2020 and 21, it depends whom you, where you are, is a -5 to -15%. Okay. Somebody says -5, somebody says -10, somebody says -15. But no doubt that we are in a challenging terrain. Next 6 months to 1 year. But that is the past. We can't, that is out of control. But what we have done, everybody, government, industry, our regulator, I think last 3 months, they have done excellent job. I heard our professor, Shiv Kumar, he said our finance minister last 3 months seems like aging for 3 years or something, right? Yes, I agree with him. So they have really they have put everything to revive our economy. And that gives me a lot of hope, number one. Number two, you see what is our forex reserve. All-time record, 560 billion plus foreign exchange reserve. You look at our economy is totally domestic driven. 80% of our economy, we don't depend on other countries. 80% of our economy based on our domestic savings, investment and consumption. So based on that, I think there will be, whether it's a V-shape or a U-shape recovery. But if you compare with the USA, Europe or other countries, probably our recovery will be much faster than other economies. Number one. Number two, to do that, quicken that recovery, government has given some fiscal stimulus. RBI has thrown some 7 lakh crores. This include 3 lakhs guaranteed loan to MSME sectors. Why MSME important, ma'am? Because most of our economy is informal, okay? What we call informal sector. Micro, small and medium sector. They are not sophisticated people who will go to the bank and like Reliance or Bajaj, they can get the bank line, okay? They depend mostly on NBFC or small loans, okay? Micro finance companies. They export, 1/3 of our export is because of them. About 50% of our employment is because of MSME sector. They are the lifeline of our economy. Government of India has declared 3 lakh worth loan, guaranteed loan. So if you ask me whether enough money we have given to the industry to survive, answer is yes, big yes. But whether it is enough, answer is big no. Why no? There is a lot, they call it, there is a lot of slips between the cup and the leaf, right? Government has done its job. RBI has done its job. But how soon the bank manager calls his borrower to give a loan, or he's still scared because last 3-4 years, all the bankers, all the NBFC, all the financial lenders, I can tell you, including mutual funds, those who give everyday crores and crores of loan to this, our MSME or NBFCs, they are totally risk averse. The last 2-3 years, they have lost heavily. 1 lakh crore to DHFL, 1 lakh crore to the ILFS, huge loss because of Yes Bank and PMC Bank and all that. So it will take some time. Question is, it will take time. So what we have to do, you, me, everybody, those who know what is finance, those who can understand, and you know somebody, he needs money, he's not getting money, it's our job to connect him to a banker, speak in a banker's language so that he understands the need. Government has guaranteed 3 lakhs crores. He is not taking even 1 paisa risk. He has no reason why he should not give the loan. But let me tell you, my honest feedback is only 20 to 30% still positive response has gone so far. It will go a long way because everybody has to be motivated to understand that COVID risk is not only Prime Minister Modi's risk. It is not RBI's risk. Its risk is affecting your life, my life, the country's economy overall. And coming to a little more of a finance, no, micro. If I am a lender, as an NBFC, microfinance or a banker, this is not normal market where I give my loan and forget every 3 months I recover my interest and then I classify my assets. No. Now every banker has to have a role of an entrepreneur. He has to go to the entrepreneur because there is a lockdown, because everybody is scared. Everybody, there is a lockdown. Employee who works in the factory, he is scared. The entrepreneur himself is scared. The banker who gives money is scared. So everybody has to come together to create this, restart this value chain. And what it means, if you are a technical terms, no, you are a risk manager. Not only that credit model, what you see, 5C, you see, give a loan, or you have no credit risk model to measure and manage the risk. In addition to that, what we call it, you have to manage the tail risk. Tail risk means very unusual risk. This is operational risk, this credit risk, this is liquidity risk. All risks are now all come together. It's a very complex scenario. So banker has to expand his risk management, that responsibility, and he should not be inside the chamber, his own chamber. He has to go to the field, work with the entrepreneur at least next 6 months to 1 year till our economy recovers. And just to tell you, there is also some huge opportunity I see. Why I say this COVID-19 is a huge challenge. Also, I see huge opportunities. If you look at 30 to 40 large economies, those who are either developed economies or those who are like India, just developing, including big countries, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, okay, and Russia. Who is the best country? You take a poll, either in India or outside India. You ask 100 people. These 30, 40 names you give. In terms of recovery, in terms of growth potential, in terms of a 21st century growth potential, not short-term next 1 year, 2 year, 10 year, 20 year horizon. Madam, I will be happy to share with you my own feedback is 99% probability they will take India. Why so? 19th century, if you go to history, belong to Europe. We are ruled by Britishers, right? Portuguese, Spanish, so many rulers, all European ruled the world. 20th century, who ruled? Mostly USA, right? In Asia, last 30 years, who ruled? China, because their economic power. They were growing at 10% year after year, 30 years or so. But if you see last 5 to 10 years, they are now slowed down because of their one-child policy. Their demography is against their growth strategy, okay? Because of that one-child policy which they adopted 50 years before, now that is working against them. But in our case, hum do, hamare do. You know, this is our policy, right? We two and our two. So every 2 death is balanced with 2 birth. You know, what is golden principle? I don't know. Whoever has decided that 2 child family, I think is a golden principle. Why I say so? Today, out of 130 or 140 crores of people, you know what is the age profile? Half of our population is either 25 or below. Half of our population is 25 or below. This is a huge demographic dividend. This is a huge demographic dividend, and this will contribute to what I said: savings, consumption, investment, and which was around 37 to 38% before 10 years. Now it has come down last 3-4 years because of slowdown. It is now it is around 30%. To me, the way government has acted last 3-4 years, okay, like reforms, financial sector reforms, they have brought down your corporate tax rate to half. Earlier, if you was to have a industry, you will give around 33-34% to government as a tax, right? Today is only 17%. Huge benefit for new manufacturing industry. So that I think will attract a lot of industry, number one. Number two, you know, COVID virus started from where? It started from a city called Wuhan in China. China produces about 50% of our global output. They are the manufacturing, okay? Luckily or unluckily, whole world is unhappy with China. And at least part of the industry, they want to shift their factory from China. Then who is the favorite destination? Choice could be, natural choice could be India. But does it mean that tomorrow everybody will come and knock the door of India? Madam, my answer is big no. Why? Madam, last 35 years I have grown. I have been a traditional banker. I take a lot of interest in market development. I was working in beautiful city, most beautiful city called Paris. I came to India because I see the opportunity. My job is with the students. If I'm talking to students, I think they have a huge opportunity just waiting before them. Not today, short term, they have to work hard, but I'm telling medium to long term, next 10, 20, 30 years, if we work hard as a nation, we will have a huge opportunity. What I mean by that, I want a little bit to define, ma'am, from risk point of view. So growth, if we are looking at growth, 60% of our GDP is services. Around 25 is manufacturing, around 14, 15 is agriculture. You know, agriculture, it employs 60% people. We never modernize. Okay, we have small land size, huge complex issues. Probably it will take more time. Come to industry, as I said, there are low-hanging fruits. There should be one ministry, straight away Ministry of Implementation. Okay, they should invite what are our strategic priorities. They should invite, give a checklist. Within 1 month, they should be able to implement whichever industry wants to come from a US or any other global entrepreneur. Within 1 month, we'll give land, labor organization, whatever they need, one single window. If we can do that, that was done by China. That was done by Mr. Modi when nano factory was denied by West Bengal government. Within 1 month, he set up nano factory, that production facilities in Gujarat. We need that type of action. No more of theory. We have a crisis. If we can do that, lot of industry will come, manufacturing sector will shine. Make in India will be productive. Now coming to services. Services, ma'am, again, low-hanging fruit. 60% people, you, me, and my students, those who are listening to them, they are human capital. Indian leaders are respected globally, ma'am. 5 years I worked in Germany, 3 years in France. You can't imagine. They don't express that, but they all respect Indian leaders. Last, I'll go to 2007-8 crisis. When global crisis was there, the largest bank, global bank, Citibank, you know what happened? Citibank became bankrupt. You know who was CEO? There was one Indian name called Bikram Pandit. He was CEO, salvaged the bank, brought to the rail, normal operation. Sundar Pichai, who is heading Google. Yesterday or day before, I saw newspaper, he is talking to Modi to help something to do in India. And today morning, it was a pleasant surprise. Just before joining your webinar, I listening to TV, Reliance AGM, they announced that 3 to 4 billion he has already bought last 24 hours. Walmart, they have brought some 17 or 18 billion something on Flipkart. This is in new India. There are huge opportunities. We Indian service sector, we are leaders. What we need is our education and healthcare is totally neglected, but it will take a medium to long term. What we need for students is to work hard. There are challenges everywhere. Find out opportunities, whether you are finance student, non-finance student, whatever your area, there is huge opportunities. Just for example, this COVID-19, okay? There is a whole world is looking at India when we can give them the medicine. right? And if our financial sector, risk management is the key. There is sunrise sector. Last 2 years, I have been director for Premia. Let me tell you, last August 2019, Government of India has issued a circular. This is Premia and FRM from GARC. They are recognized. They said all the banks, those who will have a risk, what you call chief risk officer, they have to mandatorily pass this exam, PRM or FRM. Mandatorily they have to do. Government of India regulation. RBI has issued a regulation. IBA has already regulation. We have 20 lakh employees in banking sector. Even 1% people know have any risk management. There are 20,000 people of risk professionals we need next 2-3 years. Okay.
Thank you, sir, for your opinion. Sorry, I'm interrupting you because we are running short of time.
No, just one thing, last
Yes,
message.
yes.
So what I want to just tell the party message for students, along with whatever study you do, just do one global certification. And top 3 are FRM, PRM, and FRM, PRM, and CFA. They are globally recognized, so you will never have job scarcity. I have done all 3, and last 20 years I have really enjoyed the spirit of success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for showing our students the way to actually take the opportunity in this particular difficult time for their career.
Thank you very much. I extended a little bit of time because really I am passionate about this my topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I am going back to Professor Shiv Kumar.
Please.
Sir, as Nirakar sir has told about the stimulus that is provided by the government of India, and he is saying that it is not sufficient. So my question to you is that what is your opinion? Because the different developing economies as well as the developed economies, they are coming out with a fiscal stimulus for uplifting the economy in this difficult time. So what is your opinion that which type of economy now will excel? Will there be the developing economy or the developed economies?
Okay. Indirectly, this particular question has been answered by my fellow panelists, but let me just rephrase them just in plain English. And what we saw in terms of that is asset class, for example, are the valuation methods that what we are using. And even the names such as the airline industry or Netflix, they were just dropped, and then digital solution like Remedy was also addressed, even in the fields of education or whatnot, or food services, etc. So all those things are coming into play. Just to state that in a very simple sentence, the recovery, when we address it in 2 dimensions, economic recovery versus financial markets recovery. The financial markets possibly could recover sooner, always. The economic recovery is going to take a little more than what we see. For example, if we talk about the current levels of employment, etc., sometimes the salaried class in India will normally complain against the income tax. That is what we just heard, how it has come down. But still, that is the only group that pays the income tax, at least. But now, with the pandemic, this particular group will be very, very pleased because they still get their salary per month, whether they were productive enough or not. We do not know, honestly. And to that extent, in the G20 countries alone, 660 million workers have been displaced, either furloughed or fired or terminated, or services no longer required, etc. All those things. And that is one of the saddest things. It will be the case of the migrant workers across the globe, particularly in developing economies and those who serve our informal economy, etc. One other thing that what we noticed is the issue with China not addressing the pandemic, so which we have already seen that in context. But with the newly imposed tariff regulations, and loosely described as a tariff war because it's the catchphrase, we have seen at least 50 multinational corporations have started slowly relocating their production facilities, at least 50 of them. And it looks like India could be the beneficiary of some of those areas. The forecast by various experts will be 15 to 30% of the production capacity will be relocated, and India will be the largest beneficiary. And fearing that the border dispute just happened to cause that kind of an artificial distraction to that extent. So that is the view of various economic experts and also the various international pundits in this case. Even if you take, let us say, the industries like airline industries, which are defunct, who could have imagined Indian Railways would have come to a screeching halt? Even during the times of war, the railways always operated, but right now everything is just held completely stationary. And even just a small baby of an aircraft, it costs approximately $500 to $600 million in terms of a price. And the bigger babies, the jumbo jets, will be in about $1 billion plus range, approximately. Even to park an aircraft in any airport, it is approximately $110 per hour. And it is all used in terms of a tonnage. So a 100-ton aircraft, a 200-ton aircraft will be a little more than that. That's the average price. So even during a 24-hour time period when these large babies are sitting somewhere in various airports, the airline company is paying $240,000 per aircraft per day, which we can't even imagine. As long as these babies are in the sky, they just make the money. And day before yesterday, that is a Monday morning, when I checked my email, McKinsey had sent out a 94-page, you can call that a solution or a roadmap, or how do we recover from the pandemic. And one of the things that is the report said is, I did not have the time to look at all the 94 pages, but the 4 methods of a solution that it had suggested is recovering revenue. So first of all, revenue generation is the key. One of your questions with regards to cash flow, that figures actually here. As long as the revenues are there, companies probably may not even care about their profits and losses. Cash flow is the king. So therefore, as long as there is a cash flow, there is one more operating cycle, etc. We can always move on with that. So recovering revenue is going to be the first step for any industrial sector in this case overall. I sympathize with the ordinary people who are the guys and the small schoolgirls selling popcorn in large movie complexes, so like AMC or similar other cine movie complexes in the US. And they have nowhere to go right now. So rebuilding operations will be the second step to come out of this. And some or other, like we in the field of education has figured out, okay, this kind of a medium or Zoom link or any other learning management system platform is the way that we are going to reconfigure our delivery of education methods probably. So that for rethinking the organization is going to be the one of the third step in doing this. And the Professor Abel Kinoti addressed the digital solution. I'm taking the key place from them. And that is what exactly McKinsey had suggested. So adopt digital solutions, that is going to be the future. There is no other escape for that. I hope I addressed your question.
Okay, thank you, sir. Opinion. We have among us Mr. Suraj Malik, who is an expert in mergers and acquisitions. Sir, M&A since past 3 decades have been observed as an important corporate strategy. Companies, they are using the M&A for survival and the growth. So in the present difficult time when the COVID is the problem, in this particular situation, what change do you expect in the M&A panorama? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Anshu. And I've been so mesmerized over the last hour, listening to Abel and Shiv Kumarji and, Dr. Pradhan, Manish as well on valuation. I think so much of valuable knowledge has been shared by everyone in the last 1 hour. completely very useful, very relevant, and very crisply put as well. As far as M&A goes, there is going to be a drastic way. So M&A is not going to go away because of COVID, but the way in which M&A is being done is actually changing drastically. Just like every other thing, there is a new reality also. Right from the process, I mean, how, because earlier there were, you know, you develop trust when you met someone. To do a deal, to do an M&A is almost like getting married to someone. You two organizations are getting married, and you develop trust only when you met, and that's the biggest change that is happening, that people are not meeting each other. So there is a larger time that parties are taking to build trust, to negotiate virtually, to share data on virtual data rooms, to go on the hypothesis on, you know, the past is no longer relevant, as Manish mentioned, right? Valuation, whatever were the multiples, whatever was history, is no longer relevant. The future is going to be different. Whatever spikes or lows during this COVID is also not sustainable, right? Some businesses like EdTech or, you know, technology, Zoom, etc., these all have spiked now, but whether these are sustainable or not, no one knows. It is the unknown or the double unknown, like Mr. Pradhan mentioned. So in this mindset, for someone to press on a button to take a call that, yes, I want to acquire, lay out clearly why I want to acquire an asset, all that is becoming increasingly difficult. But at the same time, companies in sectors which have done better, or sectors which have done better, they are seeing a great opportunity that let's consolidate, let's emerge stronger. And there are always these cash rich, or, you know, organization doing better, or funds doing better. There is so much of liquidity today in global markets. All of that will actually fuel M&A. People getting salaries, someone mentioned sitting at home, the salaried class, all that is going into passively going into funds, passively going into venture capital, and that all will fuel M&A. So activity will be there, but the process will change. The target screening process will change. The valuation basis will change. Negotiations will change. We've heard a lot about this post measuring, closing, etc. Defining deal document. Startup investment, when you're acquiring a company and all. Now people are going back and looking at clause by clause, that is this practical, is this relevant, is this doable in a post COVID world? How do we integrate doing M&A easy? How do we integrate post M&A? Today, even an existing organization, if you hire a new person, it's hard to get that person onboarded in terms of culture and all. Imagine bringing a whole organization to align with a vision, strategy, and structure. So all these are new challenges, new perspectives that is emerging. But at the same time, what I'm seeing is a great deal of undercurrent and a great deal of activity in the pipeline, where people are just saying that once there is some sense of stability, once there is even a hope that this is now stable, this is now the real future, the worst is behind us, the level of activity will grow exponentially.
So when I'm talking about the M&A activity, since the COVID has affected the different sector in different manner. For example, there are some sectors where the cash flows have been drastically affected, the revenue have been drastically affected, and they have to undergo the change in the business model. And there are some of the sectors which are actually excelling. So in this particular situation, what type of deal flow you are expecting for these kind of sectors? The sectors which have been benefited by the crisis, and the sectors which have been hit by the crisis. So do you expect any changes in the deal flow?
Actually, the deals will spike in both extremes. Wherever on the M&A, the sectors that have done well, the larger ones will start consolidating. Or even if the largest don't consolidate, you know, the number 2, 3, 4 will come together to stay alive, to survive, right? And to just sustain against the larger one.
So, sir, what will be the motive of M&A now?
Survival. I think currently
survival is the motive.
Is one, and with interest rates coming down, generally it will also be a pressure on the cash-rich organizations that, you know, in hindsight, 2 years later, a lot of companies will be, and I'm using a very strong word, shamed for not using their capital efficiently, because they could have gone and done M&A. But they were very conservative and all, and you will see management being very, very critically evaluated that there was an opportunity, but they got so badly stuck, or they couldn't find a way to do it, versus organizations who are taking that, if I may say, punt or call or a calculated risk, whatever we call it. Mr. Pradhan will say like it's risk, no one knows it. But people who are able to quantify it and take that, I think those management teams will get rewarded and will get flourished. I mean, those will be the case studies which, institutes like yours will celebrate if we just go ahead 3-4 years down the line. And we will have case studies where someone had cash but sat on the cash and did nothing. So that's going to be the drivers. I mean, are while they're at home or wherever continuously evaluating opportunities, but pressing the button is the key thing now.
Yes, sir. Sir, companies, they have used actually the M&A deal structure as the way to attain the synergies from the deal to attain their objective. So what changes do you expect in the M&A deal structure now? What strategic changes do you expect in the M&A structures?
So again, pre-COVID, the world was trying to get to a templatized way of doing things, fairly simpler. People wanted simplicity, not too much complexity on tax positions. In India, especially, you tried to do structure with the least amount of regulatory interface, etc. Currently now, because liquidity is challenged, the new thing that is emerging is do a cashless acquisition, whether through a swap or a merger, or we already had seen a lot of these acqui-hires that happen in the startup situation. Because even if an M&A is happening, no one wants to pay in cash. They will pay in kind, so that at least the money or the liquidity on the book is preserved and you're only diluting economically. A lot of that is happening. When it comes to even acquiring another company, people earlier were control freaks and wanted to acquire, a significant majority or maybe make it 100% also. But now joint ventures or staggered acquisitions are going to be more, because people will want the seller to be around to help to normalize things, to just and maybe get an upside on what he didn't sell on days by retaining his shareholding and by transacting at a future point of time. From a seller perspective also, seeing some very interesting sellers are saying, fine, we are ready to come down, be more reasonable on value. But never before I've seen a seller telling a buyer very clearly, show me the money. I mean, if you're talking about buying me, show me your money, guarantee me, get me a letter from your bank or somewhere, or put money in escrow that after doing diligence, etc., you will actually buy me out. So even in structures that today, you have to safeguard payment for the seller, that if you spend 3 to 6 months in stitching a deal together, the buyer can't suddenly wish away that this will not happen. So yeah, these staggered acquisitions and earnouts and JVs, this is the norm that I'm seeing in future that is happening, or already happening. I wouldn't even say it's future. It's already the way people are doing this.
What strategic changes in the due diligence do you expect nowadays?
Due diligence. So as I said, there is travel limitations and there is limitations on what you can get information or how you can get. Now, work is still getting done. This is a service industry, so a vendor of a due diligence will operate with the same degree of efficiency if he's getting the information. But the focus area has changed. The focus area from a trend analysis or normalized EBITDA or, to get to having exceptional items. Now the focus area is really on what are the costs to restart, what are the costs to return back to stability, what are the permanent reductions in cost, right? Everyone is focused on cost in such a big way that sellers are claiming that our future cost might be lower than the current cost. Even with all this remote working arrangements, people are looking at cyber security, they're looking at employee health data, etc. And also interviewing a lot of management or top people to see that how did they deal with crisis, right? Because this is also giving you an opportunity to tell that how strong or what conviction do people have. So these are new things where, you have to do this in the diligence. You can't work with a checklist of the pre-COVID era and just say that I will look at financial data and trends and, do the bank recos, etc. You will have to now look at more on what will it take to normalize. I'm doing a transaction currently where the bigger risk is actually the buyer and the seller are both okay, but the seller significantly relies on raw material on a counterparty, which is outside the transaction, right? And that raw material supplier might potentially go bankrupt, and that would kill the value for everyone in the deal. So you are now in diligence also looking at the supply chain of the parties to see that if there is someone in that ecosystem who might go belly up and just kill the valuation for this.
Sir, FDI has been observed as the major driver of M&A nowadays. Now, in the present situation when the restricted FDI will be there, so what changes you expect on the M&A activity?
So FDI, the biggest change of the restriction they bought on, investments from neighboring countries, and really they were targeting investments from China. A lot of other countries, because China went into COVID first, but came out first, and then they started looking at, depressed valuation assets, and they bought a sizable piece of shareholding in one of our, large banks. So that's what alerted the government. And even US, UK, Japan, similar measures were bought by other countries also, where they restricted foreign investments into sensitive sectors, let's just say sectors that are important, or into listed companies. Because government is operating remotely also, they said that rather than, making a refined policy, as of now, let's just put everything that comes into China under a screening mechanism. They also want to see where this money is going, what is changing. And then, that's slowly now translated into even restricting apps, etc. Now, from a startup perspective, these MSME loans and all, we've seen that there are plans and, data and statistics, but a lot of only, let's say, PSU customers were able to use it for now. Startups seldom get this, and startups used to feel money from a Chinese investor or a fund was easier to get a government incentive. That's the ground level reality. They could convince a financial investor there. And that's drying up capital, or that's putting them in a great deal of uncertainty that, this was a country where private capital, and most of our startups, which are unicorns today, about 50% are Chinese backed by the likes of Baidu, Trent, Alibaba, etc. Now, I'm not saying you've closed down the tap, but you're saying that whatever comes through this tap, the government or a bureaucrat will now sit into judgment. And that will delay the process. I still don't think they will block investment. They will just like to see that if it's not going into a sensitive sector like healthcare or defense or, financial sector where data is important. But eventually they will allow or let loose this for consumer sectors and the others which are not sensitive to an economy.
So now I'm switching back to the topic, which is the future. So now in this particular, when I'm talking about the India, the most of the businesses are family dominated. So in the present situation of the crisis, what are the key learnings of these family dominated business, and what strategy do you expect for them?
Yeah, majority part of businesses in most economies, including in India, are family owned and family governed. Now, historically, if you see, when you don't have a very large power matrix or center in an organization, the resilience generally is higher. So which means if calls have to be taken, hard calls have to be taken, all that is relatively faster. It's a leaner organization. So family owned businesses are at least theoretically should react faster. Now it depends a lot on how the particular organization is structured. I mean, the person in power, how is he able to deal with, assess this risk, cope with risk, and take advantage of that resilience, because the entire decision making is centered and with one person. They are also now thinking, family businesses always thought on how we can grow. I think the question to them today is how we can survive, because they were, hesitant on taking external capital. They were hesitant on taking external help in terms of advice or professionals. Even hesitant on selling family assets, right? There's a lot of value that you keep creating assets, but never really monetize them. But today, to survive, some of these businesses will have to take those hard calls that they let go of some non-core assets. They dilute maybe some of the real estate, which everyone in India typically likes to accumulate. And, really focus on what really matters. If they've created legacy in a core business, focus on growing or sustaining that core business. I've seen that change, or that is something that is most families today. And, earlier they were quite busy people also, right? So they hardly got time to spend with their family. But now with everyone being more spending time with family, it's a good time to also sort out any disputes and the undercurrent issues on succession, on estate, etc. Where these family owners, at least the ones who are evolved, are using this opportunity to sort the house in order. It will help the business to survive. I mean, we have data to say that by the third generation, only 3% of the family businesses survive. So from 100 businesses, second generation is 30, and by third generation is 3. And the reason is often miscommunication, not so much dispute. So this is the time to just bring the whole family together, align them to vision of what is required to be done, and build a larger consensus.
Thank you so much, sir, for your opinion. Now I'm coming back to Professor Abhay. Sir, my question to you, that in the present crisis, where you see the corporates in Kenya post-COVID? What fiscal stimulus they require and how they will excel, or which sectors will flourish now? Over to you, sir. Professor Abhay, I'm audible to you?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the examples given by colleagues, I think they are very good examples. Let's pick the example of Kenya Airways, which is known in India, in Kenya. Kenya Airways before the crisis, and a debt to the tune of about $10 million before the crisis. Now, confront that now with the crisis, and taking into consideration that it has not, okay, it is now doing domestically now, the global fields have also been affected. So it means that it requires a lot of government funds, and what the government is doing is it's trying to take control of the airline so that it minimizes the other stakeholders, because as Marik and the rest have said, the liquidity issue is really a major problem. So there is a lot. Now, some corporates like Safaricom, which you know, Safaricom is one of the biggest players in the digital sector. This one has done very well because right now they're even giving us options of where we can send money. You can send up to about $3,000 on a mobile platform, or using a bank transfer, which is known as PesaLink. You can transact money from all sections. They are telling people you can do that for free. So the ones in the digital platform, these ones are going to do. The ones in the financial sector may also do well. Now, the ones that are in the manufacturing, if they are doing the production of PPEs, these ones are doing well because now Kenya has emerged as a net exporter of medical accessories in that's an area where we were not doing. So yes, in the medical field also, key sectors that you're going to see some dynamics, because I'm looking at it in terms of the comparative advantage, because we've been talking about to do the globalization, but now the localization. Now, agriculture and the food sector, agriculture, and you know that's an area we do very well, especially horticulture. Even though it was deemed to have been affected, don't forget the cargo business all of a sudden came over, took over, and they are doing extremely very well. So food sector, whether it is in its raw form or agro process, these are areas that we are likely to see a lot of that they are going to come up with. Now, medical field, we are going to do that, but now there will be a major competition between the public sector, or hospitals, and the private. The private, I think, will have a problem because they may not compete given the COVID figures and numbers, things like that. So that's an area that we are likely to have issues. So generally, I think we are going to do well, but we are going to be more inclined better in the service sector, than in the manufacturing, which is, I think, what is coming out to be our competitive advantage. What people are talking about, people in the professional field offering their services in different parts of the world, Kenya will come out from that. But as it has been said, the implications of COVID will have far-reaching implications even beyond 10 years from now. So we don't know. Maybe, I think, the family, as Marik is trying to put it out, that those family values, the individual human values, I think these are the ones which are exemplifying, and this is, I think, what we should really thank COVID for, because we are more human today than we were before. We are more of a world today than we were before, because it affected everybody. So it doesn't matter where you come from. The disease has made us uniform. Now the question is, how do we give that differentiation to be seen in the business sector? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I thank all my panelists on behalf of IIM Sirmaur for sharing their enriching opinion on the developed and developing economies, on the valuation, on the corporate cash flows, on the risk perspective, on mergers and acquisition, the family business. So thank you all the panelists for joining us and for sharing their opinion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
So
Anshu.
very
Thank you, sir. Thank
Corporates, family business, MSMEs, every aspect of business.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much,
for
sir.
supporting us.
Thank you for supporting us, sir.
We would also like to thank all the attendees. Thank you very much.
Claudia, giving us
Okay,
the
sir.
chance.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
You can close the meeting. So should I exit?
Economics
हाँ, yes, sir.
हैं? बात करेंगे सर.
Okay, we will talk later. Thanks.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Bye, sir. नहीं, मामा जी.
Okay, I'm closing that.
He's saying something, क्या?
पता नहीं.
Leave event का भी कब जाओगे?